Welcome back to the This Week in Fantasy podcast. I'm your host, VenomousStare. This week it's going to be a solo episode. It is the Week 7 preview. So as usual, we will begin the podcast by beginning the previous week's matches. This was the most exciting matchup by far. This is a bout between the King of Funny and I, the recently incarcerated King of Funny and I narrowly took it. And even though it looked as though I was a shoe-in, which is something that I was told by nearly everyone in the league going into the Monday night game, it was the Cowboy-Arizona game. I was rolling with Zeke and Dalton. Both were horrific. It was one of the most repugnant displays in Cowboy history. And this is a Cowboy team that just looks appalling. This is a Cowboy team with every talented lineman injured. They're starting multiple rookies. Any big name that Dak Prescott got to play with, like Tyron Smith, for instance, is injured and gone. Andy Dalton is playing with the same sort of line he was playing with when he was a Bengal, and expect the same sort of results you were getting from Dalton as a Bengal, because it's very funny. In football, the line really does mean everything, and for the casual fan, especially the casual Cowboy fan, which is very similar to like the casual Yankee fan, in the sense that they will frequently have the loudest opinions and know the least about the sport. The casual Cowboy fan won't say shit about the line. When the Cowboys piss away one season after the other on Dak and his ineptitude, and they have a perfect line, your idiot Cowboy fan will just say, well, let's keep rolling with Dak. 4 more years of Dak. What they don't realize is you have 5 linemen who miraculously have their primes synced up and form this god-tier unit, which you could essentially plug any middling quarterback and running back into and go above 500. That's what Cowboys fans didn't realize about Dak. Yeah, he was above average in terms of record and results, but with that line and Zeke and the best probably 3 receiver lineup in the entire league with Lamb and Gallup and Cooper, who wasn't going to go barely above 500 and never be a real playoff threat. And now you have moronic Cowboy fans thinking that Andy Dalton, who looked good in his takeover game whenever Dak got hurt, because the Cowboys looked terrible versus the Cardinals, your average normie Cowboy fan is going to blame it all on Dalton. When even though Dalton wasn't great, the crux of the issue here is the offensive line. The offensive line was terrible and injury rattled, and just had no hope of containing the Cardinals' defense, which really isn't even that good, but that sort of tells you how bleak things are for the Cowboys, because neither lineman is going to be making a swift comeback. So Cowboys are going to be rolling with rookies on the tackles like Steele, and it's going to be very ugly. Zeke Elliott's production will be affected, Cooper's production, Gallup's production, and of course Lamb's production will all be hurt. The tight end becomes unstartable, and it's a damn shame, because if you're a Cowboy fan, they're probably going to win 2 games for the rest of the season. That's like the over-under I would give, 2 games. We're 6 games into the season, and I think the Cowboys are going to win 2 more, maybe. And I mean, that's like a, I might push there. I might push with the 2. And the line is terrible. And you could sort of mince words and say that, well, the receivers are great, the running back's great, Dalton was serviceable. How are you going to say that they can't cobble together 8 wins to win a bad division? The defense. That's the real crux of the issue here. You can really go back and forth with the offense a little and have an argument about how good or bad Dalton is, or, maybe these linemen could become serviceable through some experience, but the real crux of the issue with this Cowboys team is the defense. It's repulsive. It's one of the worst defenses I've ever seen. It's one of the worst defenses the Cowboys have ever had. The secondary is awful. The secondary can't tackle. The secondary very rarely puts full effort forward. It's basically Jalen Smith, and then for the 5 plays when Van Der Esch was healthy, him as well. The defensive linemen are relatively worthless despite the big contract given out to DeMarcus Lawrence. I think that Woods is relatively decent as far as stopping the run goes, but really no quarterback pressuring. And the linebacking core is okay when healthy, which is never and the secondary is the worst in the NFL. Also, the offense doesn't run enough. Thus concludes the Cowboys segment of the podcast. So, the only reason I went into that whole diatribe is because that was pretty much the crux of this entire game and will be the crux of the Cowboys' entire season going forward. It's the thing you really need to look at is the offensive line, and it's going to be brutal. Just brutal. So I just narrowly won. It was a very close game, although going into Monday night it looked as though I was going to win for sure. Dalton was projected 19, Zeke was projected 15. I had the backdoor out of Hopkins, who literally had one until midway through the fourth quarter where he reeled off a huge reception, huge yards after the catch. This was a very narrow victory for me over Ben, a rival of mine, an OG owner of the league, who was, of course, leading his division and still is. Other things to look at: Jared Allen lost versus Kansas City and blamed himself for the loss, put up terrible passing yardage. Duke Johnson, let's see, I think it's David actually, I always forget. Yeah, it's David. David Johnson did well, but the Texans just continue to lose. Although, without Bill O'Brien in the way, the Texans have actually looked better. I do think the Texans will finish with a better record than the Dallas Cowboys. And frankly, even though the Texans were very cheap, gave away draft picks for no reasons while floating salary cap like a bad StarCraft player, I do think the Texans' future is a little bit brighter than the Cowboys, because even the biggest idiot, including the Texans staff, is aware that Deshaun Watson is the future. And it's a damn shame they took away DeAndre Hopkins from him, because even though David Johnson is talented, I think that Hopkins matches up stylistically better with Watson, a scrambling quarterback that creates a lot of space with the safeties. Philip Lindsay had over 100 yards and was largely responsible for New England losing the game versus Denver, which was a huge upset. You really don't see New England lose consecutive games under Belichick, and this was really, to me, the first sort of difference, the palpable difference between the Brady era and the Cam era. And I'm sort of discounting the period where Cam had COVID. I'm just throwing that out. I don't even consider that well, Cam is injury prone, which is true. Therefore, he got the virus, so it's a point against him. No, I don't even count that against him. But if we look at Cam's performance, it was sloppy Joe. He was hamstringing the Patriots the whole time. And you've got to think that those are the sort of performances that Bill doesn't like. And it wasn't just Cam. The Pats in general were really sloppy, but Philip Lindsay was really responsible for burying them. And he's a diamond in the rough. Melvin Gordon, I think, was sort of overpaid, and Lindsay does have his injury issues, but remember, when this guy's healthy, this is a 5 yards a carry type fella. A real threat. So this is a legitimate guy on Ben's team, especially with Melvin Gordon having the issues that he's having. And I think Melvin Gordon in general isn't really a guy you really trust as far as longevity. When you plug him in and he's healthy, you love him, but not a real trustworthy guy as far as fantasy longevity goes. So Mike Evans queefed out a mere 1 point, 10 yards. This was pretty repulsive and a defining factor in Ben's loss. And he got banged up in this game, but to me, this isn't something that comes as a shock. If you remember the beginning of the season, Evans was sort of having, he did find the end zone, but if you look at the yards total, we have now 3 games where he got 10 or less. And he does find the end zone because Brady likes to target these tall guys. It's very hard for defenses to scheme against both him and Gronk as far as personnel and height and sort of fade routes, play action. The Tampa team just has a ton of weapons, and I actually think they're going to win the NFC this year. I'm very high on Tampa. They just keep getting better. They signed Antonio Brown this week, which I don't actually think is that big of a deal. I think they were already a very strong team that was improving. And I just love their win against Green Bay. I bet on them to win. And I even said on last week's TWIF that they would win. To me, to say oh, I bet on them, in these TWIF videos is sort of well, whatever. What's more important is I said in the last video that Tampa would win. And that was an upset. Remember how good Green Bay was, how high everyone was on Green Bay, and the fact that they looked incredibly good the week before and were a juggernaut, basically, is how people viewed them. having to play Tampa. So Tampa won. Brady looked great. And what the point I'm driving at here is Mike Evans, he's not the Mike Evans of old. He has a much higher probability of having poor weeks because of the fact that it's not Winston airing it out in garbage time. Evans isn't guaranteed to get 10 targets on long balls or balls in garbage time where he's going to be covered less. This is a much more competitive Tampa team. This is a Tampa team with a lot more weapons, and that makes players like Godwin and Evans much worse. Both of these guys were top 10, top 15 type receivers before, when this was a Winston offense, but in a winning Brady offense, players like Ronald Jones have more value. Moving on, Terry McLaurin, disappointed in a loss to the Giants. Very disappointing for the Washington football team to lose to the Giants, because this was a Washington team that is not going to get many wins this year, and the Giants are just, of course, terrible, and were able to notch the first win, which I think whenever, I don't live in D.C. and I'm not a Skins fan by any means, but I feel like if you're a fan of Washington, you really want them to beat the shit to your teams. Like, you don't mind losing to the good teams. You know you're going to have a losing record, but as far as whenever you get to play like the interdivisional bad teams, those are the ones you want to win. So I see McLaurin here go flaccid against a bad defense, and Ben's receivers 1 and 2 here on paper look pretty solid, and they were both terrible. And when you look at Felds, this is a Tennessee defense that isn't, the steel curtain of the Steelers 70 teams, but it's a pretty good defense, and the Texans did well, but still managed to lose, and Felds found the end zone, and that happened early in the day. And I know I say things like it happened early in the day, or it was Monday Night Football, and it might seem like a moot point just looking at these post-game box scores, but to me it's interesting because it has a lot of context in the game. Because remember, part of the reason why fantasy football is so interesting, and the best fantasy sport, and the one that has the most players by far, is the fact that shit pretty much happens on one day. Like, all of the, obviously with COVID it's different, but in general, all the games happen on Sunday. You have a Thursday game and a Monday game, but everyone can set their lineup on one day and watch the games on a weekend and enjoy them. It's not like fantasy baseball, where you're methodically and frankly just neurotically checking through all the lineups to see who plays and who doesn't, to the point where it doesn't even make it fun. So that's part of what makes fantasy football so great, is the context of all the games happen in one day. So after 3, some guy might have had his entire team play except for one guy, and you sort of know what you're working with. And it's sort of like being on CT side in Counter-Strike, where you sort of know how much you need to make up. And it's like being on CT side in Counter-Strike in the second half of a game specifically, where you start with terrorist, you win X amount of rounds, and then you sort of know how many more you have to win to execute the victory. It's like that when your opponent scores all their points early. So the context of this game was everything really interesting happened on Monday night. And just to wrap up here, the dichotomy of Ben having the Cardinals defense and them absolutely destroying the Cowboys, and I fucked up and misclicked, and the Cowboys, who were terrible at every turn and made laughable errors at every turn, and Zeke and Dalton both just being sub-5 for the longest time, as well as Hopkins being sub-2 for the longest time. This was a game that every single element went against me. So we should go ahead and move on to Matt Stafford and friends versus Aaron. Aaron just continues to find ways to lose. If you look at the bottom half of his team, it's just repulsive. One thing funny is that last week it was agreed upon by everyone, including myself, that Claypool would not have a good week. This was the guy that had that crazy 4-touchdown week and put up 35 when no one had him. But he put up 15, so split the difference. He didn't flop like we sort of thought, but he didn't do great either. Decent for a flex, I suppose, but whenever receivers 1 and 2 do terrible, that really does do it for you. The Jets were great against, Miami was great against the Jets. The Jets, of course, are probably the worst team in the NFL, and Parker got banged up and really missed out on feasting on a terrible Jets D. Remember, the Jets safety, Adams, that was causing all those problems, is no longer on the team, so the Jets defense is even worse than before. CD Lamb, the only thing he really did was make Aaron feel good about the prop bet because Spencer actually dropped Michael Gallup this week. Spencer and Aaron have a bet between who's going to do better, CD Lamb and Michael Gallup. Even though Michael Gallup was a boomer bust guy, I think when you drop him on your fantasy team, it's a pretty good indicator of how the bet's going. As far as this game specifically goes, the highlight is Jefferson, a guy that Spencer was not high on in the preview. And whenever I look at this team overall, Robbie Anderson, even though he is the receiver number one, are you really confident in this guy? Is this a guy that, even though he is a number one option, this is a Teddy Bridgewater offense that's run first, a run first offense. And it really shows as far as the Cowboys receiver production goes. And whenever Teddy Bridgewater having a bad week is a death knell for the Panthers. And to me, as a Panther fan, that's why I wasn't excited at all about getting Teddy Bridgewater. Because if he performs even a little bit below his average, his normal level, your team is fucked. Because he has so little upside. Even if Teddy Bridgewater is perfect, it's not even, it's like 70% of Alex Smith. And Alex Smith has been mediocre his whole career. Shut up, Elise. A known game manager. And Teddy Bridgewater is just way behind this guy. And he's also injury prone. This was just a mail-it-in year for the Panthers after losing Cam, I think. Very disappointing. And with McCaffrey hurt, they sort of have an excuse, which is unfortunate because I don't think they're going to move forward. And there's really no light at the end of the tunnel as far as the Bridgewater era is concerned. He has the same flaws as Dak with a much smaller head. Todd Gurley got below 10, even though the Falcons popped off under the new coach and absolutely decimated Minnesota, who doesn't look nearly as good as they did last year. And Lilly really benefited off of the Bucs defense, who dominated Green Bay and put up 19, making up for Joe Flacco being awful. You know, obviously, Lilly dropped Matt Stafford despite basing her identity off of that, and of course he got scooped up. It was very curious to me that she picked Joe Flacco joke. Russell's my Jimmy's Wilson was on bye, but it didn't really matter because Aaron put up 74, so let's move on. Austin got obliterated. Joe Mixon had a dirty dozen. He managed to punch it in a very weird game where the Bengals got way ahead early and then shit the bed and lost a nearly insurmountable lead. They were so far ahead and just choked it away in a terrible way. So really disappointing. Tyreek Hill, boomer bust, 2 points. Smith-Schuster, this was really weird. Cleveland was awful to the point where they were pretty much out of the game early. And the guy, Claypool, that Aaron picked up and flexed, really stole a lot of Juju's looks. But my God, you would think even if they got ahead early, you would think if Pittsburgh put up 38, Juju would get over a point. That really hurt old A. Bizzle. Starting the Packers versus Tampa was foolish. The Packers don't have a good enough defense to really denote doing that. I think that he would have been better off streaming a defense. Look at that. The Packers are ranked 19 in defense. There's no reason at all to start them. They had a bye before, and they put up 5 against Atlanta when they had their old coach, which is nothing. So this was perplexing to me to start this team. And you roll with a high-risk guy like Hill, you're going to get outputs like that, and it's going to result in point totals like that. OBJ, what do you know, feast or famine? And the one thing worth noting is the entire Browns team got obliterated, so yeah, you didn't expect OBJ to do anything, but this is a guy who is billed as top tier, right? OBJ, around 2 or 3 guy, number 1 in the depth chart. Big hair, big mouth, big name. He puts up way too many outputs like this. He has too many poor weeks, too many dud weeks in between the flashy weeks. it doesn't take a very talented receiver to shit all over the terrible Cowboys secondary. But to be consistent week after week is really what you want from a receiver. I think the ideal blueprint for a receiver is 10 points, and then if they have a touchdown or a big week, you can definitely get 15 plus. But this game you play with guys like Odell Beckham, who are going to have weeks consistently where they get less than 5. You don't want to be starting guys like that unless it's like an emergency flex fill-in. And remember, OBJ was the cornerstone of this big trade that AB did, so it's very interesting to see how that worked out. And when I look at this game from Weston's point of view, last week I framed this as a matchup that Weston had been sort of holding the line week after week, getting decimated, waiting for things to become better. And Fitzpatrick, very oddly, got snaked. And Tua got put in, despite the fact that, yeah, he had 2 interceptions, but that's Fitz. Led his team to victory over the Jets, big freaking deal. Taylor Grant could have done that. But then he ended up getting benched, and he's been talking to the media about how now he feels backstabbed. Because some Cowboys fans are talking about, like, oh, Fitz, let's trade for Fitz. Fitz and Dalton are about the same level. Fitz is going to get decimated. With the Dolphins line is better than the Cowboys line at this point, so. And even then, Fitz is not really doing. Fitz is basically the same player as Dalton, with a little more upside and probably a little more disaster in him even. Mike Davis still going strong. The Cowboys are still a team that runs a lot, even though McCaff is hurt. Derrick Henry went absolutely crazy on the Houston's defense. Derrick Henry is a guy who, unlike a lot of running backs in the league, has 200-plus yard games. He's had more 200-plus yard games in the last couple years than anyone else. He also is very good at finding the end zone. Whenever you look at a running back that you want to draft and target in fantasy football, Derrick Henry and his ilk are the guys you want. Run-first teams where they don't share at all. Zeke was like this before the Cowboys became a travesty. For weeks and weeks, Weston waited for Julio Jones to come back, and Calvin Ridley benefited. And this time, Julio was back. He wasn't just banged up beyond recognition, and he popped off. Those were the factors that really buried AB, although with a pretty pathetic 73, he was going to lose to almost everyone in the league this week. And if you look across the board, literally everyone in the league he would have lost to. So nice win for Weston. Statement win, and I think the fact that he won so big and the things he really relied on came through was bigger than the fact that he won in general, although with the division he was in so insanely powerful, he did actually need the victory on paper. So we have a surprisingly poorly performing Jackson team, an owner considered by many to be very intelligent on a 4-loss streak, losing to C. Goucher here, who put up a flat 100. Now this game began with Rodgers, who played the 3 o'clock game, just playing horribly. Probably his first or second worst start of his career, and that was the first week Christian had him, so a big bummer for him. Madison also underperformed, and remember Dalvin Cook was banged up, and they were facing a Falcon team that many just said had no defense at all, so it really looked to be good for Madison, and it was just terrible for him. 3 points. You get 3 points from running back 1 and 3 points from quarterback 1. Good luck winning, but Seagauch manages. So how did he do it? Clyde Edwards-Helaire, tons of looks on the ground, tons of ground covered. They dominated Buffalo in one of those weird reschedule games. Amari Cooper caught a garbage time touchdown. I know a lot of Dallas Cowboy fantasy owners, as far as not their defense, but the offensive weapons, obviously, were sort of sitting there at the end of the game saying, like, the Cowboys are on the goal line and have had 10 downs to punch it in. Surely they will punch it in. They're not going to go for a field goal down 30 plus. Who will get it? And it was Cooper, so that was nice for Christian because that was just icing at the end. So really to seal the deal. Jaguars look absolutely abhorrent. They really got beat up by Detroit, who, of course, has been bad pretty much my entire lifetime. And this guy never really had a lot of faith in DJ Chark, but essentially if the Jags do well, he's the receiver that will find the end zone, but the Jags are a team on the heavy decline. This is very bizarre to reflect upon like the Saxonville era and how with you have Fournette and Ramsey and these guys, and it's like little flash in the pan. They were going to beat the Patriots, a lot of people thought at halftime of the AFC title game, and go to a damn Super Bowl. And it has been straight downhill since then, and it has been a precipitous downfall. Almost to the point where you don't even really understand how it happens. Because look at their quarterbacks. Nick Foles and Gardner Minshew were both serviceable. So how the hell are they so horrific? Very puzzling. Especially when you consider they were a defense-based team. So Kenyon Drake just obliterated the Cowboys, and you might be saying to yourself, well, how did the Cooper touchdown ice it if he won by 18? Well, if you're watching the Cowboy game on Monday night, which you should have been, I mean, if you like the Cowboys, you just had to watch the beating because it was a new quarterback and it's going to define the rest of the season. And if you hate the Cowboys, you were just reveling in the misery. And if you saw the game, as I'm trying to get to the point of, Kenyon Drake had a huge run at the end that was just like 80 yards and a touchdown, so just an atrociously huge swing. And for this game, it really wouldn't have mattered. Christian would have won because of the Cooper touchdown, but makes the game look a lot less close than it was. Nice start from Christian to start the Falcons kicker. Minnesota just looks diminished. Don't expect them to do anything in the playoffs this year. As far as Jackson goes, Ridley found the touchdown despite Julio doing well, which explains the lack of Falcon running back production. Robert Woods put up 10. The Giants' defense start was smart because the Skins can't do anything, and they're having like a quarterback controversy where they can't figure out which subpar person to play, which is sort of humorous. Lamar Jackson got Jackson 30. And the real crux of the issue here, Cam Akers, goose egg. And this is really why I traded Darrell Henderson. Between Cam Akers, Malcolm Brown, and Darrell Henderson, it's very hard to truly trust a running back for the LA team because Sean McVay is a pass-first guy. This isn't a team that likes to ground and pound. Even when they're ahead, 3 receivers set. Oh, okay, I'm going to throw a screen. I'm going to go over the middle. It's very unpredictable, very high risk in my eyes for a running back. And to me, like Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, like these are basically running backs in terms of guaranteed target share. So Cam Akers laying a goose egg. Devastating for Jackson, sure, but shocking? Not really. And here we have the tight end for Miami. Goose's total lack of involvement. Fantasy managers, blah, 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 blah. That's what the Herbs say. Basically, this guy shit in Jackson's mouth. And it was brutal, especially considering it looked like Jackson might squeak out a win. And if you look at the graph there, fucking stupid pop-ups, as Dwight would say, way, way ahead, and then C gouches at the end. Right here, this little area, I would make a box if this was like a StarCraft replay, but this little area right here is what you call like the Victoria's Secret, the Curse of Sea Gouch. This little bloop, this like, oh, Kenyon Drake, 60. I mean, Kenyon Drake running for 80 yards and a touchdown, that's a 14-point swing. That's almost the entire difference of points. So it looked very close for Christian, and at the end it's like, oh yeah, he won easily, but not really. So here we have Clapfor struggling mightily without Christian McCaffrey. This is a guy who, of course, with the first overall pick, really relied on that. And is just having such trouble taking advantage of a weak division. Father-son matchup, of course. Tannehill aired it out for 4 touchdowns, embarrassing Houston. Remarkably, Tannehill and Derrick Henry both had phenomenal days. Phenomenal. If Tannehill had not turned it over twice, with the fumble and the interception, this would have been a nearly career day. I've always been a guy who was high on Ryan Tannehill, and whenever he blew his knee out a couple years ago, everyone was just so eager to throw dirt on his grave. Oh, they're going for Tua. They're tanking for Tua, which is funny to me because Ryan Fitzpatrick is like a total gamble every week and just basically had an auto win this week and was surprised whenever the Dolphins, who everyone and their mother, even casual fans knew, were doing everything they could to angle for this Tua kid. From Bama, of course, the lefty quarterback, Tua Tagovailoa. Yeah, anyway, there's no guess, so LOL. The point is everyone and their dog knew this kid was Miami's future. He hurts himself. He falls in the draft. Miami gets him. Beautiful stuff. And Fitz is suddenly like, oh, I'm not the future? No, Fitz. You're not the future for anyone. You know, if the Cowboys had the perfect line they had in 2016, they might pick you up over Dalton. But really, what sort of team is looking for a Fitz? What sort of team, like, basically wants like a Jameis Winston type guy who's slightly less retarded? I mean, no one. He was like, oh, I feel stabbed in the back. I feel betrayed. Dude, how are you the last guy to know? Tua sit below on the depth chart. You're talking to him every day. You see the coaches over there grooming the dude, and you're surprised? I don't know. To me, that just came off as a little bit whack. Now, was it right for the Dolphins to be like, well, Fitz has been serviceable, we're going with Tua? I mean, Fitz has so many blow-up starts, they should have waited for him to have a blow-up start. It was like, Fitz buries the Jets, any idiot could do that. Great, we're going to put Tua in. And then Tua runs some garbage time series, and they're like, oh, we're blown away, we're going with Tua. No. Wait for Fitzpatrick to get firing squatted and have a fucking 5-interception game, and then be like, we're going with Tua. Because it's not going to take long. Fitzpatrick's going to shoot himself in the foot. It won't take but 5 weeks. Look at his career. This is one of the guys with the highest variance in the entire league, which is why it was so ballsy of me for me to start him in the Super Bowl last year. So let's move on from that. Hilariously, even though it was talked about last week, especially from Spencer, and it wasn't as though Spencer said something stupid, but we just pointed out how Cam here had to roll with both of the Detroit backs, laughingly saying, like, one of them's going to find the end zone, even though the Detroit backs have always been awful. And sure enough, this Swift fella, DeAndre Swift, has his career day. I seriously doubt he'll ever break 24 fantasy points again, but came up huge for Cam. A.J. Brown is also a guy that has been coming up big for Cam when he's not hurt. Last couple weeks he's found the end zone. First week I'm memory holing, and of course he was hurt all the other weeks, even though Cameron still started him. Anyway, Cameron wins. There's not a lot to be said about this. Let's move on. And another interesting matchup. Spencer goes down again. This is the worst start Spencer's ever had, as well as his longest losing streak. And who would have guessed that Spencer and Jackson would be a combined 2 for 10? These were two owners that a lot of people would have ranked as 1 and 2 as terms of talent and fantasy knowledge, or certainly top 3 or top 4. They're both really struggling this year. And hilariously, they're in such a joke of a division that the teams that make the playoffs that aren't them, aka 2 teams from the Cursed Lands division and 1 team from the Oven, probably Ben, is going to have to face a low record, albeit talented and dangerous, Spencer or Jackson. I would be very surprised if AB or Clap4 won the division despite being the incumbent leaders. That would be very shocking to me. This is a division where no one can get out of their way. Jackson's team, even though I think he improved a ton in waivers this week, and I think he's actually going to start to improve, has been bad. Spencer predicted that early on. Spencer's team, Spencer's been saying Adams and Thomas are coming back. I'm going to be okay for the last 4 weeks. Spencer's team has been struggling. Yes, injuries have hit him. Injuries hit everyone. Sanders got hurt last week for Spencer. Thankfully he lost so he could pick up Boston Scott. But anyway, one thing I love to see though, Jackson and Spencer grinding on that waiver wire, not giving up, not having their head up their ass, and really continuing to try. And why wouldn't you? The guy above you in your division has 2 wins. So that's the division of death for you. Sarcastically named, and at this point is sort of a disgrace. Nothing against anyone in that division. I love them all personally, but you see a team leading a division at 2 and 4, and you see a division like the one I'm in, the Cursed Lands with Christian, with 2 5-1 teams, 2 juggernauts, and there's only 1 wild card. And I don't think there's anything wrong with the format. And I'm not going to pull a sea gouge and all of a sudden, oh, the format didn't favor me this year. We got to change it. 8 teams have to make the playoffs. We got to be like the MLB this year. No. The point that I'm making is that the Cursed Lands division this year is just insanely talented, and that can't be understated. And whenever you compare it to the middle division, which is of course the division with Spencer and Jackson, two top flight owners, it's very shocking how much parity there is between those two divisions. So continuing on with this, Cam Newton, 2 interceptions really hurt the Pats. He really threw those picks in an inopportune time that allowed the Denver Broncos to capture that very odd victory. And overall, we can sort of hit the highlights on this one. No Fried won, and the main reason he won, if we just peek at his team, the Steelers decimated the Browns. Anytime you can get over 15 from your defense, it's nice. 10 plus from your kicker is always great. Mahomes didn't have like the shootout with Allen that a lot of people thought he would, but he did manage 20 plus. Gaskin here, of course he managed 10 plus versus the Jets. Coop and this chump diggity tight end did nothing. Thielen managed 10 plus. This really wasn't an impressive week for No Fried, but Spencer still lost. If we look at why, Zach Ertz hurt, out for 4 weeks or so. Mozart hurt. San Fran can't stay healthy at all, especially their offense. The Dolphins' start was intelligent, netted him 15, which was a huge part of his attempted victory effort. And he had a couple guys on the bye week here. Thomas, who was hurt anyway. It's actually beneficial for guys to be injured during their bye. It's a nice little sync up. So hopefully Thomas will be back completely 100%. I don't care what injury designation says. Hopefully he will be back 100%. The Michael Thomas we know and love. The bye week, of course, will help him get rested. Sanders got banged up, like I said, although he still got over 100. Spencer benched him. And Brandon Cooks got over 10, so Spencer here had Jared Taylor, who hilariously is better than that Hines guy, who was just a total fraud. And he's Jonathan Taylor, I suppose, broke 10. And Michael Gallup, as usual, dropped valuable passes and a Cowboys blow-up start. Adams had less than brutal week for Adams, who has been very disappointing. Hasn't really done shit except for the first week. So Spencer loses again, but sort of in the same way that Cell was able to live in Dragon Ball Z, the ineptitude of the other characters allows the plot, which is Spencer living like Cell and becoming a monster, to live. So thanks, Vegeta. That's UAB. Moving on. We're going to go ahead and start with Aaron and I's matchup. Tell me if you guys like it zoomed in a little more. I feel like it's easier to see. And on my screen it looks a little weird, but I feel like on the recording it's way more palatable. Alright, so Drew Brees is facing off against Carolina. I'm going to sort of do this in the same way that I spoke about last week's matchups, in the way that the teams reflected, and it played out where I didn't have to hit the same nail on the head throughout every single similar player. I'm going to sort of preview what I think about the IRL matchups and how it reflects on fantasy, and that'll make it way easier to listen to because I don't have a guest. So Drew Brees is facing a pretty pathetic Carolina team, and we should check on the health of Michael Thomas before we talk about this. So Spencer has him. Let's see how old Thomas is doing. And is it going to work? How many times do I have to click? Alright, Michael Thomas is out. That's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure. It's another part of having no guests is you have to check shit. You can't just assume. Alright, so Michael Thomas is out. That means Alvin Kamara is going to get a fuckload of looks, and Drew Brees' value has actually gone down. So even though he has a pretty good matchup, expect Kamara to pop off and Brees to be not great, because their backup of Michael Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders, has the corona joke. So I might actually start Jimmy Joke, although he's playing New England. Now this is interesting because New England is a team who doesn't look good and is coming off of 2 losses, although there are stats out there proving how Bill Belichick virtually loses 3 games in a row consecutively at never ever. It's very rare that Belichick will lose that 3rd consecutive game. Also, the San Francisco team has a ton of injuries, especially to their backfield. To me, this is very tough, and considering I think Carolina is so weak, I don't really see how Brees doesn't get at least 15. And last week I was sort of kicking myself as Andy Dalton was throwing up all over himself because Jimmy G had locked in 23 earlier in the day and had locked in 20 plus midway through the second quarter. But remember, Jimmy G was abhorrent against a not that great Miami defense. He was coming off of an ankle injury on a team full of injuries. So that's one of those things where whenever one guy finishes early and the guy that you end up starting that plays later is doing terrible, you can sort of sit there and agonize and kick yourself, but there's really no point because you always have to look at the decisions you make based on the information you had before. And right here, I'd be sort of interested to just, not that I'm going to like do like a poll and go with what you guys say, but Jimmy G against New England, I think a New England team is probably going to win. Or Breeze, who has no receivers but is against a weak Carolina team. Tough decision, and if only I could have picked up Matt Stafford, Keepo. So Gardner Minshew facing off against a mediocre Charger team. I think that he'll probably get 20 or 18 or so, and they'll end up losing anyway. Jacksonville just really can't get out of their own way. Zeke Elliott, healthy, Butterfinger, fumbleitis Zeke Elliott, in a must-win game against Washington. I think that Zeke will actually do pretty well in this game. I think despite the fact that the offensive line is terrible, Zeke will rack up 12 and find the end zone. I don't think this is a Cowboy team that is going to be able to air it out that well, and they're playing Washington, and they've had a week to recover from the Cardinals fiasco, so I'm holding my breath and saying there's no way it could be as repulsive as last week, although I really don't have any confidence in them in terms of winning because of the defense. I do think that some of the fantasy options are startable. James Conner is facing off against Tennessee. Tennessee, of course, is an exceptional team this year, and they're really coming into their own, and they are far removed from the Jeff Fisher 8-8, just absolute garbage Oregon quarterback nonsense. The Mariota era is over, and thank God for that because he was never very talented. Really, that was a player who got by off of college hype for a very, very long time. Never very good at all. I don't expect James Conner to have a pop-off week, even though Pittsburgh has been doing well. Pencil him in for 10. Ronald Jones facing off against Vegas. And this is a guy who got a lot of touches because Fournette was hurt last week. And even though his value is slightly diminished because of the addition of Antonio Brown, I still think he is going to get his looks. Even when Fournette is healthy, Ronald Jones has proven that he's the primary back. So I think Ronald Jones will have a solid week. Keenan Allen no longer carries an injury designation. He was able to rest last week. He's facing off against soft-ass Jacksonville. You've got to imagine he'll break 7.3 put up by Philly receiver Fulgham. And I think that's a safe bet, although Singletary remembers playing the Jets, so I would pencil Singletary in for a dirty dozen, even though Ronald Jones should about match that. George Kittle and Gronk. Gronk was great last week. I really don't think Gronk has any part in this upcoming week's playbook or sort of plan as far as the offensive coordinator is thinking. Antonio Brown just signed. I'm thinking this will be similar to what happened when he was with the Pats. Like he gets a high amount of targets, especially in the first half and first drive. Gronk is a guy who, yeah, he was great last week and really showed up, but you're really sort of playing Russian roulette between him and Evans and Godwin. And not to beat a dead horse with, oh, the Brady team has so many weapons, but with Ronald Jones getting a decent amount of carries and freaking Fournette to also contend with, I don't really see Gronkowski doing a lot this week, although I do love him, and Gronk to Brady is one of my favorite pairings ever. You have to consider George Kittle is going to have a good week because of the injuries to the other weapons on that San Fran team and how no matter who is the San Fran quarterback, they love their tight ends. Kareem Hunt had a poor week last week because they got behind so quickly, so early. Chubb is still hurt. Since he's not great, I think that Kareem Hunt is due for a double-digit week. This is the week that Claypool shits the bed. Last week, he basically stole everything that Juju Smith-Schuster was supposed to get. That's a fucking mouthful. And this week, guarantee Claypool less than 5. That's my guarantee. Kareem Hunt will outperform him, probably in fact double his points. Carlson, the Vegas kicker, going up against Tampa. Tampa looked very, very good against Aaron Rodgers last week. I'm not really high on that kicker start against a sub because Justin Nip Tuck is on bye. Very consistent kicker. University of Texas product, one of the most accurate kickers in NFL history. He's on bye, so I'll start the Aggie instead. I missed that rivalry. Wish it was played every Thanksgiving. And frankly, that's one of the biggest travesties in college football that's gone. Randy Bullock, an also very accurate kicker, is playing Cleveland. I expect this Cleveland-Cincy game to be just like a shit show shootout. I think they're going to score a lot of points. It's going to be a good day for the fantasy owners of those teams, even OBJ. Thankfully, I was able to pick up the team that played the Adam Gase Death Spiral team, and it's the Bills team. As you know, I was very high on the Bills last year, drafted them, held them for weeks, and in general, sort of root for them and hope they're going to win the division. And the way the Patriots look, my God, is that a safe bet? They did gargle an L last week versus the Chiefs, but no way in hell the Jets lose. Last time I checked the line, the Jets were 22-point dogs. Think about that. 22 fucking points. That's how bad they are. You've got to wonder, if you're a Jets fan, what exactly is the end game for the Adam Gase era? Are they just waiting for the end of the season to fire him? And if they do that, are they also going to do the GM? It's just a disaster up there in New York, and there are other podcasts you want to listen to if you want to hear just people kvetch about that for 40 minutes. It's actually pretty funny. It's funnier to hear the people that really care about that stuff get mad about it than it is to hear people like me just laugh about it and be cynical, I think. So if you want to listen to New York fans crybaby, I would recommend the Michael K. Show. It's an afternoon drive program you can get the podcast version of pretty easily. So it's on ESPN. It's not exactly underground. Rams defense against Chicago. This is a mistake I made last week, picking up the Panthers, because Spencer picked up the defense I wanted. And the Chicago Bears are actually a way more solid offense than they were in the past, so I don't love this start. And in general, I think the Rams are an overrated team. More offensively in terms of who gets slurped for no good reason. But if we want to eye-fuck the benches here, Jones is questionable, isn't expected to play in Sunday's game. Then why the fuck is there a Q? Why isn't it D for doubtful? That's literally the explanation of isn't expected to play, so that's why he's on the bench. And then Dalvin Cook is on bye, which I looked at earlier in the season when I previewed all my matchups, and this was one of the things that jumped out at me as being a distinct advantage, but it sort of works back around to a sort of advantage to Aaron, where at least he gets to, when he's banged up, he gets his bye. Anytime you have, as I said before, anytime a guy is banged up and he takes his bye, that's what happened to me with Keenan Allen last week. That's a good thing. Like, the guys are going to have bye no matter what, so it's a good thing if their fucking questionable tier injuries are synced up with byes. Obviously, like Saquon Barkley with the blown out knee, it doesn't do shit for him when the bye comes. But when guys like Cook are sort of on the fringe, hell yeah, that bye week is actually a big pro for you as a fantasy owner, because the chance of them coming back and playing that next week when they were questionable on the bye week is almost 100% in a lot of instances. So as far as my bench goes, we spoke about Jimmy G earlier. Not a lot of interest in Landry because I think OBJ is going to get a lion's share of the targets. Some interest here in starting Bell. I can do some rearranging here with Hopkins and stuff if necessary, but in general, this is the lineup I want to roll with. And when you look at the running backs here, even though Singletary is due for a big day and Claypool has a hot hand, I think I'm definitely favored over Aaron because of these two significant backs being on the bench. And if Aaron does lose, he'll be at a dismal 2-5. So Aaron really needs this victory, and everyone else in my division really needs me to win. As the defending Super Bowl champion, I'm on a huge win streak going back into last year, and it's very hard if you look at the division as a whole to think about, well, if Wiley doesn't lose, then how the hell am I going to win if you're Lilly or Weston or Seagouch? So remember, guys, only one wild card spot. Team Rocket versus Seagouch here as we go into the next matchup. Kyler Murray playing Seattle's defense against Aaron Rodgers playing Houston's defense. Don't expect Rodgers to have another bad game. Both of these guys will have over 15. Because of injuries, AB is forced to start Tony Pollard. Mixon is hurt, and Gio Bernard was already picked up by someone else. Sammy Watkins is hurt. Hooper is hurt as well for Cleveland, so if you have other Cleveland players going into a good matchup, this is good as far as Hooper being hurt and funnels going to you. And interestingly, Smith-Schuster, who was a little banged up but doesn't carry an injury designation, maybe that's why I only got 6 keepo, is on the bench. Now, I don't know if AB is going to go through with this. If we look at his other options, OBJ, I mean, if you trade for OBJ and you believe in him, you got to start him this week. Tyreek Hill, basically, you got to play him every week if you have him. And then Hunter Renfrow, which to me is an interesting start because this is sort of just like a slot guy on a run-first team. Caught his only target. Yeah, like, why would you not start Juju over Hunter Renfrow? I guess is the question I would ask. Anyway, Tony Pollard, don't expect him to do shit. It's not like Zeke is hurt. Basically, Tony Pollard got looks last week because Zeke fumbled twice in 2 consecutive drives, and it was so repulsive and embarrassing they couldn't risk him fumbling for a 3rd time, and like a closer tier meltdown that would have made him a laughing stock. So Pollard will get less than 5 this week. Robinson's on an offense that is just utterly sinking and hasn't looked as good as he did before, and I don't really see how AB wins this week. Shit, even if Mixon was healthy, I don't see how he wins this week. I guess the knight in shining armor he has is this, AB with the Bucks, but I don't really have much faith in that. He's one of many options, and if AB wants to win, I think that not only does he need to start Smith-Schuster this week, and Smith-Schuster has to do well, but just in general, Juju is going to have to like be a consistent like receiver 1. Because Hill is boomer bust, we know. OBJ is boomer buster, we know. So, like, to me, Juju has to be wide receiver number 1, and he has to get 15. And is he really that level like he was 2 years ago? No, he's not. I think that having AB off the team has really affected him in a negative way. So, AB really needs to win, and I'm not talking Austin. Or I am talking Austin. I'm not talking Mr. Birdchest with the blonde mustache. 3-loss streak from AB, as I think that he has sort of managed himself downhill. I don't think that he is a manager who has like consistently improved his team. And I think facing off against Seagouch, funnily enough, these were the 2 teams that traded. And if we look, Mixon is out, confirmed out, which is why I do these videos like 10 hours before the game starts. So I'm not like, oh, he's questionable, and like the teams freaking know on Tuesday and just lie. But anyway, because of these injuries, like, you just have to favor Seagouch. Jacobs, alright, this is a guy who gets a shitload of touches. Even when they lose, like, they're still going to run it. Obviously, advantage him over Pollard, who's a backup. And then Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who AB gave away. Denver's flying high, but don't expect him to win. Edwards-Helaire is going to do well. Amari Cooper, like, he pretty much all the Cowboys' weapons have gone downhill in value for obvious reasons. If you haven't watched that Cowboys-Cardinals game, let me give you some advice. If you're a Cowboys fan, don't fucking watch it, ever. And if you hate the Cowboys, watch the whole VOD. It was terrible. Amari Cooper here, I'm not really feeling. I think that if you look at Seagouch's bench, Madison's on bye, Higgins is dog shit, Hilton's is dog shit. He doesn't have a better option, but you don't feel really good about starting Cooper here, I don't feel like. Same with Chark. He's way down, way down. Drake actually had a great week last week. Of course, he played the Cowboys, so we wouldn't have a good week. Detroit against Atlanta. Obviously, Atlanta's going to do well under their new coach. They're putting up a lot of points. And the Eagles managed to get some turnovers off of the terrible Giants. Shocker. This is another win where I think Seagouch won't put up over 100, and his opponent will underperform, and he will get the victory because of that. It's not to say it's going to be one of those like 60 to 65 like joke games, but none of this bottom half of the lineup really inspires much confidence for me. You know, I think Drake will get like 8, but pretty top heavy here for the Gouch. If his running backs can do it along with Rodgers, notice that they all play pretty early in the day. Like Seagouch really wants like 70 from this top little block, and if he can do that, I think AB will be buried with not many outs. Advantage Gouch. Here we have Jackson in an incredibly important matchup, facing off against Weston, and this is one of those matchups that I look at and say, I know that doing this video, TWIF Week 7, this is around the time after, obviously I've done TWIF for years, this is around the time when people lose interest and stop watching. And Jackson's 1-5 this year, and Jackson's a sort of owner that wouldn't stop checking his lineup and wouldn't lose interest, no matter how bad he was doing. But for Christ's sake, he's only one game behind. And Weston, even though he's the caboose in his division, is at a modest 3-3 and is on the up as far as his team goes. So this is a great matchup, and if you look at the records, that's sort of deceiving because you wouldn't think it would be. So lots of new looks for Jackson as he stole Matt Stafford from Lily. You can tell Lily doesn't watch TWIF because she got credit every week for like the Matt Stafford gimmick, and there was a lot of like quarterback turnover with Andy Dalton being dog shit in bye weeks and Joe Flacco being dog shit and whatever. Matt Stafford being dropped was not the play, especially because it was Lily's name. He's playing soft-ass Atlanta, and Julio Jones is full health. Great pickup by Jackson, although I can attest to the fact that at least half of the league had claims in for Stafford. I mean, half of them out of spite, half of them out of necessity, I suppose. Hebert has looked relatively solid for the Chargers, especially in the last couple weeks, finding his own. I think he's going to have a good week versus Jacksonville. Expect both these quarterbacks to pop off 20 plus. Mike Davis is continuing his reign of dominance with Christian McCaffrey hurt. You shouldn't underestimate or discount Christian McCaffrey's abilities just because Mike Davis came in and did it. Remember how bad the offense has been in general. Christian McCaffrey does stuff other than just put up yards and touchdowns. He creates separation and makes it where people have to role play for him. Not role play, LOL, game plan for him. Anyway, that's part of why the Panthers were so bad last week against the Bears. Gio Bernard, nice pickup from Jackson. See, this is a great example of what I'm talking about with Jackson's free agent ability, waiver wire ability. Mixon goes down. It's not like an obvious thing. He didn't blow his knee out mid-game. Jackson snags Gio. Good move. Although Davis gets the edge. Carson versus Henry, obviously Henry. Carson does find the end zone a hell of a lot. Almost like a weird amount. I had him last year. He also had a knack for this, but he's going to get outperformed by Henry, obviously. I think Henry will have a good game despite Pittsburgh doing well against Tennessee. It'll be a good game to watch Sunday at noon. To me, that'll be like one of the games to look for. Some people do the Sunday ticket bit, but to me, there's also like a mystique about watching like one game and following it along as a narrative as opposed to just watching all the scoring. But anyway, that'll be a good game. But I don't think that the Derrick Henry-led Tennessee Titans will fall behind and be useless like the Browns of last week. And that's what happened to me regarding Kareem Hunt. Kirk had a great week last week. Don't expect it again. Seattle's defense, they're not world beaters, but they're not the fucking Cowboys, for Christ's sake. Julio Jones will obviously outperform him. Calvin Ridley is also due for a big day. And Allen Robinson, although he looked terrible early, I still think this is a hit-or-miss guy despite being a number one option. And Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones will both pop off. This is a team that airs it out even when ahead, as attested to by the Super Bowl where Brady embarrassed them. So even though Julio Jones is healthy, I still love the Ridley start here against the soft-ass Detroit defense. The Njoku start versus Cincy. Jackson cooking on the waiver wire because Austin Hooper was hurt. Jackson really firing all his streets and doing everything he can to win this week. Not giving up hope. Love to see that. Unfortunately for him, the Giants locked in 5, which is not great. And he has Robert Woods and Gallup to work with. Gallup got dropped by Spencer, as I mentioned before, but I just think that this is Weston, excuse me. I just think that Weston is favored across the board, as I said with Jones earlier. Kelsey's going to have a big week. Gostkowski, this is going to be what I think, relatively high scoring game, like a 24, 27, a per team plus scoring type game. two good offenses, frankly, even though these are sort of defensive teams historically. But overall, got to give Weston the edge, even though I love the moves that Jackson made. Weston, for weeks, really relied on three things: Hebert popping off, Davis continuing to do well while McCaffrey was hurt, and Julio coming back, as well as Derrick Henry being solid still. And all those things happened, and Weston's really peaking right now. Advantage Weston. Here we go. Cam, who managed to click the optimize button, versus Spence Worthless, who I love. Tanny Penis, I expect to have a decent game, like 18 points or so versus the Steelers. Scam Newton facing off in a very interesting game. San Francisco, not so much from a fantasy standpoint, but like a NFL record standpoint, I suppose. I really am having trouble calling that one. I think it's hard to think Cam is going to have a terrible week because he's a running quarterback, so he has a pretty low floor. 14. Gordon's healthy and ready to go versus Kansas City. I expect him to have a good week. DeVote was terrible and got hurt for Spencer after doing nothing. I know how that feels. I had DeVote for years. Although Boston Scott made up for it, and his running backs average out for like 8 each, so it's not good, but it could have been worse. Chimera, as I said earlier, is going to get all the targets with the receiver injuries for the Saints. Cole for Jacksonville inspires no confidence. Adams with no injury designation versus Houston inspires a ton of confidence. Advantage Adams. DJ Moore, I spoke about the Panthers offense earlier and how I was not impressed by Bridgewater, so obviously I'm going to edge Cooks. Cook in the singular versus Janu Smith, Spencer's kryptonite. I do actually think that Jared Cook will get some looks this week because of the receiving core being hurt for the Saints. So advantage obviously there. A.J. Brown I'm going to have to favor though, even though Chicago's looked pretty good recently. I think that A.J. Brown is going to catch a touchdown again this week. If the Titans get it done through the air, he's a big reason how, and if not him, Janu Smith. So I expect that Titans-Steelers game to be a shootout. Butker and Crosby, they both should do pretty well, probably around 8 each. Browns against Cincy, I don't really understand that start. Burrows is a rookie quarterback, and he doesn't have a running back, but I guess it's okay. I just think that game's going to be kind of high scoring. And the Niners versus New England, they're coming off a weird week. Those are two sort of flippy defensive starts. It's probably going to be a push. And if I look at this, Cameron, despite being Cameron and relatively inactive, has a dangerous top half in the same way that when he had Zeke or Dak he did. Tannehill will have a good week. Gordon will have a good week. Chimera could fucking go insane with the receiving injuries. Don't expect much from this middle. And then A.J. Brown will do well. It's tough to call. Spencer already has sort of mediocrity locked in at the top. I don't really believe in Newton. Jesus, I think Spencer might lose again. He doesn't have a lot of options on the bench really at all. I'm actually going to edge Cameron. And I think it's going to be ugly. I think Spencer's going to lose another 88 to 85 type game. Advantage Cam. No Fried versus Clap for the two boomers of the league. Mahomes and Watson. I like both. Fournette and McKinnon. I don't trust McKinnon at all. Although with so many goddamn injuries in that backfield, I don't know. I just don't trust him. I don't trust James White either. It's a Patriots running back. What more do you need? Fournette's pretty bad too. This is sort of a shitty matchup. Jamal Williams is the backup. He will start over Adams, who's hurt with Aaron, of course. Cooper Kupp's going to get 10. Lockett, I think, will have a good game and get 15 versus Arizona. I don't think Godwin is going to. I think is AB still suspended? I'm not sure, but I think that if you have Godwin, if you have Gronk, if you have Evans, all their value is going down. In general, AB is going to hurt things. Ebron has pan hands. Jokey Graham, I think will get at least 6. Advantage him. Josh Brown's hurt, and he doesn't really have any other options. So I wonder if he'll start someone. I'm just going to give fucking Clap for the edge. Who cares? And here we have the Jailbird versus Matt Stafford and friends. Josh Allen. JTS jokes. I mean, he's going to get 30 if he has any talent. Russell Wilson versus Arizona is going to get 25. Okay. David Johnson versus Green Bay. Texans look terrible. Maybe he'll get a dozen if he's lucky. Maybe he'll get 8. Adrian Peterson. It's the 3-way Detroit fucking powerhead. I mean, you can't call it a 3-head monster. That's a joke. Johnson will get more. Pyle and Lindsey. I'm edging Lindsey over Gurley, who's on a pass-first offense. Stephon Diggs. The other Buffalo receiver, Brown, was hurt. He's going to have a pop-off game. Evans is a guy who gets looks in the red zone but doesn't get the yards he did with Winston because they don't fall behind, and Winston doesn't get all those empty passing yards that idiot football fans seem to love so much. Advantage Diggs. McLaurin and Fuller. McLaurin gets to play the abhorrent Dallas defense. Pencil him in for a dozen plus. You've got to give him the edge over Fuller. Felds and Hurst. Who gives a motherfuck? Probably advantage Fells. I mean, he's gotten a touchdown last 2 weeks, over 10 last 2 weeks. It's good enough for me. Obviously, Robbie Anderson will manage to shit out over 2. Kicker advantage Parkey. Like I said, it'll be a high-scoring game. And Cardinals versus Seattle. I'm not sure about that. I mean, Wilson's healthy. And Buccaneers versus Vegas. I would rather do the Patriots. The Patriots. I'd rather do the Pats versus San Fran, honestly. But that's just me. I don't think this is a matchup where Ben has much of a chance. There was not much to be done here. I guess Beasley could start versus the Jets, but like that would have been Slayton. I don't think that the other guy was out until recently, but I mean Beasley, it's Cole freaking Beasley. Like, give me a break. Anyway, alright, so let's just talk about the divisions before we end the video. Top division, Seagouch and I are just duking it out. He's a little bit over me in points because of that Mixon week where he sold high to AB. Good for him. If you look at points against, I've had much more. And right behind us on our heels is Lilly, who's also been very strong. And Weston is really hitting the high note as far as what he was waiting on his team. Expect him to reel off a few in a row and become a threat. Here we have the division of death, sarcastically named. Clap 4, 2-4, 3-loss streak. Just absolutely reeling from McCaffrey getting hurt. AB, really relying on AB to come back and become like a top flight guy. Good luck with that. Jackson made a ton of moves this week. I actually think that Jackson is a very legitimate threat for this division still. And then Spencer, the man with the number, is also at 1-5. I mean, Jackson and Spencer both at 1-5 is pretty jaw-dropping. I mean, for Christ's sake, they had to play each other once. You know what I mean? Like, there had to be a mutual victory, so that's pretty absurd. And then moving down to the big oven, we have Ben and Cam tied. That's obviously sort of a farce. I mean, it's Cam. He doesn't watch TWIF. He hits optimize. He doesn't answer his phone. Like, it's Cam. Like, he's going to crater. What's funny is, like, Cam might actually survive the bye weeks being semi-AFK. Like, playing poor Spencer, and, like, it's just going to be weird. The funny thing is, like, it's sort of like looking at a baseball team with no starting pitching in the preseason. Like, no matter what happens, like, no matter how many, like, things go their way or how much you suck out, you still don't have any starting pitching, so how are you going to win in the playoffs? Like, that's how I look at Cam. It's like, well, Ben could fall off the face of the earth or be incarcerated, and, like, Aaron could put up 70 every week, and, like, No Fried's roster looks, like, pretty bleak a lot of the time. Like, is Cam going to win the division? Like, probably not still. You could fucking drop Cam in the division of death. Same record, 4-2. Like, a huge lead. 4-2 versus 2-4, like probably still wouldn't win the division. So it was very odd. I kind of want Cameron to keep winning and like prove me wrong. I think it's like sort of like a funny narrative, but it's, to me, this is something that I've done this in the past in TWIF, where like Cam starts off 3-1 or 4-1, and I do this at like week 5 and 6. Oh, is this the year for, not even like is this the year, but is this the time where Cam goes above 500 at least? Not necessarily makes the playoffs or God forbid even wins a playoff game, but is this the year where Cam goes above 500? And like every year I run with that as a storyline. He like starts in inactive. Like not only does he never do it, he never even comes close, and he's really disappointing. So that'll be the TWIF video. Cam and Ben tied, and AB and Clapford tied, and me and Gouch tied. We're previewing week 7, and what do you know? 3 division ties, riveting.